Thank you so much. So we'll have a Q&A now, and I think I missed the panel right after lunch because I was doing an interview, but I think of the panels that I was able to watch, I think this was certainly the most diverse in terms of the different topics. We started with Professor Charney talking about the detailed history of Rakhine State and of the joint history, in fact, of the Buddhist Rakhine and Rohingya. We had Karen Youngblood talk about the process of documentation of these survivors and their perspectives and stories, as well as the reason, the reason that we can't forget why we're doing that and why that's so important. Professor Abrar, of course, talked about the Bangladeshi side of the equation and the challenges and needs for what they have to do for grappling with this crisis. We had Secretary Kilgore kind of bring a broader international perspective in terms of what needs to happen internationally between different countries to address this problem. And Demir talked about many things, but in particular, I think looking at what's happening in Rakhine State with the Rohingya crisis through the prism of another genocide that occurred in his own country, which was also very powerful. So with all of that, I could ask questions, but I'm sure that all of you have questions, so let's start there. Yes? And if you could identify who the question is for, or if it's a general question, but just because they're speaking about such different things, I'm not sure if it makes sense to identify.
I think it's a general question. I introduce myself. I'm Bangladeshi origin, German citizen. We have seen there is a problem in Syria, Middle East, and European Union opened their door, and most of the Syrians are in Europe. They have their own place here. And if we analyze Rohingya issue, I mean, last few years, okay, this is a long-time issue and it should not be solved very soon. I mean, you cannot think that over day or night it will be solved. And there is a main problem in United Nations. I mean, when they are sitting, I mean, 6, 7 parliament, I mean, who are the, who can make veto and who can cancel any resolution. I mean, we can see, we have seen several times United Nations, they are trying to make some bills against Myanmar, but China and Russia, they always blocked, okay? So that means whatever we decide or whatever we talk, we cannot make a final result there, okay? So why not, my opinion, why not in this manner? It will not be solved very fast, okay? And not only this issue, any genocide in this world happened, and this didn't happen in, they didn't solve very fast, okay? It takes long time. So my question is, why not European Union and other national human rights country, they can open the door, take these Rohingyas to their country as refugee, and solve the issue. Once they solve, they can return their home. This is my personal view. I mean, I would like to get some response from you people, okay?
Well, I think, do you want to start, Dr.? Oh, that's right, I'm sorry, I forgot that we were going to gather a few questions and then, yes.
Myanmar and Bangladesh. So what actions as a global society can take to lobby India to stop arming Myanmar? I know that Indian government is, the current government is right-wing, Hindutva and all sort of thing, but India has a huge civil society. I think they're basically silent on this.
We have one more, and then we'll have some answers, and then I think because we do have a little bit more time on this panel, for once we're not running gravely behind, we can do that one more time.
Hello everybody, this is Iqbal Tuhin, a Bangladeshi youth activist and student here in Germany. Actually, I don't have question, I have opinion with the sir, secretary. you talk about the arm deals between the powerful country, but one thing we are not considering, and I'm really thinking about this, like Burmese regime is trying to get nuclear technology and ballistic missile technology, and as well as chemical weapon, which could be used for humanitarian destruction, so like Assad regime or Saddam Hussein regime. So I think IAEA, International Atomic Energy Council, should act in this position and intervene over there. Maybe it could be a team over there to investigate how they are getting this kind of weapon, especially the link between North Korea and Myanmar should be stopped as immediately as possible. Thank you very much.
Great. So just to summarize the three kind of questions/comments, the first was, since this conflict and crisis is, or not conflict, I'm sorry, we decided not to use that word, but since the humanitarian crisis is going to be protracted, why not offer the Rohingya who are in the camps in Bangladesh safe passage to and the ability to stay in some third country until it's resolved? Second question regarding what levers and how to avoid or how to deal with the fact of the Indian government, which currently is also very right-wing, from exerting its influence on Burma. And then finally, the question of how to prevent the country from accumulating weapons, and particularly, I don't think we're there yet, but from getting to the point of reaching nuclear capability, which, you know, one, we're far from, and for better or for worse, I think Burma's much more focused on internal conflict rather than some external neighbors. So, you know, I'm not even sure who they would drop the nuclear bomb on if they had it. But let's start, and I think we might be in.
Well, sure. The refugee point is a good one, and as Harn would know, any other Canadians here? How many other Canadians? About 3 of us? Well, they're good, great, good, super. Well, we've taken, our last 2 governor generals were refugees. We're going to take 1 million immigrants in the next 3 years, the government just announced, so we're more than happy. We benefit from immigrants in Canada, as Germany does. We know how useful they are to have, and so we're happy to get them. On the India thing, we've got 1.4 million Canadians now of origin in India. There are 4 cabinet ministers in the present government who are from India, all of Sikh faith, by the way, and you probably know our Prime Minister recently made a not very successful visit to India.
Too much. Maybe like one outfit. Every time.
No. Well, yeah, North Korea, yeah, thank you very much for raising it. Couldn't agree more with you, of course.
Thank you. Demir, do you have anything to add?
On these 3 questions, to be honest, on these 3 questions, I don't have anything to say. I mean, as regards to opening door to the refugees, I can only say that my house is welcome, but nothing else. I mean,
Anyone else? Dr. Barr?
No, I think, as I said, at the theoretical level, third country resettlement, surely for durable solution, is an option. You know, and there are countries which are, you know, as you said, you know, which are taking refugees and also other immigrants and all that. That's there. But whether it is advisable at this particular point that whether that is an option that we should immediately sort of pursue. My own personal take is, you know, that's going to offset the pressure that is being borne on Myanmar right at this particular moment. If the situation really gets protracted, and then perhaps the third country resettlement. And this is where, I mean, many countries now say that even UNHCR, when you talk to them, you know, they talk about, you know, voluntary repatriation, they talk about local integration. But third country resettlement, something they are not that much there. At the theoretical level, yes, but that's not practical. Let's not talk about it. I think this is the year, the global instrument, the global compact on refugees that is being negotiated, you know, and this is the right year to talk about that. In fact, the Rohingya, I think the flow is a defining year of this time, and therefore, in terms of addressing the problem in the global compact, I think this particular issue of third country resettlement eventually, that needs to be sort of taken on board. With regard to India, my simple point is there was a huge, India as an ally in Bangladesh, there was a lot of expectation from India. And it was not only one way, the lot of security concerns of India over the years that were there, Bangladesh government really has taken on board and addressed those issues. There are many other, particularly in India's relationship with the Northeast India, the main Delhi governments. So in that context, when India was so blatantly sided with Myanmar, that was a huge loss, in terms of goodwill in Bangladesh, and put the Bangladesh government in rather difficult situation. Because where is our good neighbor, at this particular moment of time? And by the way, I don't think vis-a-vis China, I think India has lost both ways. In Burma also, they have not been able to make that much of an headway. So it has lost both ways. When you want to make super profit, sometimes you miss out. I think that's what has happened.
Yes.
And also regarding the third country settlement, what we're talking about the Rohingya genocide, and there's good reason to focus on that today. But life is pretty bad for ethnics in all kinds of areas in Burma, and how they're treated by the Damodar. And once the Rohingya situation, however it pans out, however it works out, there's still lots of other ethnic groups who are suffering right now. And the problem is the Rohingya. I'm sorry, the problem is the Damodar. It's not the Rohingya. So we need a solution that's going to work for everybody.
I think.
I have one question based on this picture.
Oh.
Please, okay. When there is a monsoon, okay, approximately there are 4, 5, 7 days always raining in Bangladesh. If I look this picture, okay, when there is a random rain in Bangladesh, this house will be flooded with water. What will happen at that time? And this coming very soon. After 2-3 months, it will happen.
Thank you.
July it will happen. So, do Bangladesh have any plan, or or the international community has any plan regarding this issue? Okay?
Thank you. I think we need to move on. But Gozani, you wanted to say something? Come. Oh, Karen, yes. Oh, Karen.
Karen, do you want to?
No, you're first. You're the organizer.
I have a specific question for Professor Charney. Mike, I've known you for like over 20 years, and you are, one of the very best scholars on Burma, particularly with respect to Rakhine affairs. And you wrote your dissertation at Michigan on this issue. What do you think is the role of, academics, foreign experts, local experts? In other words, what do you think is the role of the knowledge community in a situation where, extraordinary human events and process, like genocide's happening? Because, from my observation, we've got academic community that is known as Burma Studies, and we also have this expertly community based in London called Britain-Burma Society. They would host a different academic forum publicly, but never have I seen, a single Burmese or foreign academics and scholar that taking a stand the way you have. I mean, you have done it, but you have been branded as biased because you stand with the victim community, despite the fact that no one's scholarship has ever surpassed what you have done on this specific issue of Rakhine.
Well, we've known each other for 25 years, and that puts me a little on the spot. The fact is that I know one thing that the academic community should not be doing, and that's paying lip service to the regime just so they can get access to sources. You have people saying things that are just clearly wrong about Rakhine history and Rohingya, that in any other circumstance we call these lies, but they want special access. Probably, maybe that's why they do it. They want special access to archives or something, or they want some kind of special benefit. But the real people who should be blamed here are the 99% of Burma studies scholars who say absolutely nothing about what's happening, even though they know otherwise. They say absolutely nothing. They don't tell their students anything. They don't raise a finger because they're afraid of not getting a visa, not getting into the country, and being compromised in that way. As if the lives of a million people is less valuable than them publishing the next article or next book. It's truly shocking the degree to which they say nothing. They don't even do anything so far as even including Rohingya in any kind of events. You have Burma studies boards, you have all kinds of things. They include no Muslims, they don't include any Rohingya, they don't allow Rohingya topics. If you raise a Rohingya topic, suddenly you're biased and you're partisan, as if there are two sides to this issue. There aren't two sides to this issue. There's one issue. These are the facts. This is what's happening. It's not like there's a legitimate side that's saying that this is, this is all imaginary. That's not a legitimate side. That's all I can add to that. I'm embarrassed because of the other 99% of Burma studies scholars who say absolutely nothing.
Well, and Michael, I think that also speaks to why more Burmese people. I think that also speaks to why more Burmese people haven't spoken out, because certainly we have the nationalists, like, we clearly they are the majority, in our community, but there are other people who've, have spoken to me about with sympathy for the views that I've expressed, but who are not willing to speak out. And I think more of us should speak out, but it is the same dynamic that does prevent some people that are sympathetic from speaking out. But before we move on, Karen Youngblood had a response to the last question.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say something to the question before, or the sending Rohingya communities out into the world to welcoming nations wherever they might be in this world. First of all, I think none of us is Rohingyan, am I correct? So we should be asking them. You should be asking, what do they want? And I can tell you from the interviews and from the conversations I've had in the past is they want to go back. They want to be able to go back. They want to go back to their homeland. They want to go back to where they had their farms, where they had their land. They don't understand why they were thrown out, why they're being persecuted, why they're being run out of their country. So I think it's important to understand that, in these conversations that are happening on all these different levels, et cetera, where are the communities that are being targeted, represented? Where are they part of the conversation? Are representations in these levels of conversations? I think that's something that I feel has been lacking, unless I'm naive about a lot of the stuff at this point too. But I just want to sort of see where's the representation from Rohingyans in these conversations and being part of these finding solutions of what's possible and what's important. And there's two things I wanted to say to that. One is the recent refugees that we've talked to all talk about, I want to go back. Yes, I'm sure some of you know about the demands list that was created several weeks ago, that was sent around. Community leaders met to kind of say, these are demands we need to see in order to go back. You probably also know that a couple of community leaders in the camps were murdered because they were starting to talk about repatriation and were starting to talk about volunteering, going back kinds of things. If you talk about also with refugees who've been there since the 90s, who actually lived their life in the camps, some of them want to see going to another country because they feel like they've lived all their life in a refugee camp, and that's not a life necessarily either. And I do want to say one more thing. Worked with a lot of Bangladeshi local students and NGOs and volunteers, and I think that's where the hope is, because you see a country like Bangladesh who's engaged, who is embracing it, who's trying to do something, when we're sitting in countries that, listen, we're one of the richest countries in the world here, and what's happening? We talk about migration and issues and and Flüchtlinge, et cetera. And there's 1 million people in Cox's Bazar living around Cox's Bazar, and Cox's Bazar itself is less than 1 million as a city. They just doubled in size overnight almost, and they're feeding people and they're trying to do something about it. So I think, anyway, that's my point of view.
Thank you. So should we move on? That took a little longer, I think, than we expected. Gozani, should we move on to the Skype, or can we do another round of 3 questions?
Are we taking a break, or we're going to go straight into it?
I think I don't know.
We're not taking a break until we're done. So I think
We can go on?
you can go for
Go.
another, say, 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. Okay.
We start at 20 to 5.
Okay. 20 to. Siya Jolwin.
I want to answer your question why we are not going back. Because they will not allow people like us who speak out against this injustice to go back. I have been excluded from my country for 48 years. That's a hell of a long time. I would be happy to go there and do volunteer work at my own expense. I cannot get a visa. Here is a Rohingya. He is not allowed in there. Zani is an expat. He cannot get in there. So that's the answer to your question. There are many of us who would like to go back and do things for our country at our own expense. I don't want a penny from them. That's the answer. I'm a USC PhD, by the way.
Can I just respond to that? I want to make sure I'm not being misunderstood. I don't mean to say that you should be going back, etc. I'm saying that you should be part of the conversation about what will happen to your community. And you should not be excluded, and you should be part of it, and you should be taken seriously. So I'm for putting support and pressure onto the powers that are to make that happen. So I'm with you on that, completely.
And yes. So okay. So we have several. Yes.
Yes, this is not a question. This is an appeal to people of Bangladesh and the government of Bangladesh. Bangladesh, we are really thankful to the people of Bangladesh individually and everybody and at governmental level. But we also deserve same level of humanity in the coming months. And also, Bangladesh is a country that can do much more than anyone else to the Rohingya, to bring peace to the Rohingya people. So we appeal to the Bangladesh community, individuals, civil societies, academic scholars, activists, government, to show to do this compassion until Rohingya have peace at our own land. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So just to have order, we'll start.
Thank you. My name's Oscar Butcher, and I had a question to the panel. We've heard a couple of times today the call for a protected return to a protected homeland, and I think that is exactly what's needed, and it's an important call to make. But I also share Zani's skepticism about the ability of the UN to work towards that effectively. So my question is, in terms of what we can do as members of concerned international civil society, I think it goes without saying that hosting events like this one today is hugely important in moving in the right direction. But when we go home, I'm wondering, what do you think is the most effective way that we can take action to try and make that protected return happen?
Great. Thank you, Oscar. And should we do a couple more? Yes. Oh, and then either one.
Sorry.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Arafatul Islam. I work for Deutsche Welle as a journalist. My question is, first of all, everyone appreciates Bangladesh for taking nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees and sheltering them, providing them food and other necessary things they need. At the same time, I have heard a lot of criticism that Bangladesh has failed to diplomatically do something to make sure that these Rohingyas will go back, or putting sufficient pressure on Myanmar to take them back. So what do you think on that? Is Bangladesh doing enough diplomatically to make sure that at some point these Rohingyas will go back to a safe Myanmar, a place which is safe and they can live peacefully there?
Thank you. And then one other question over here.
Hi, I'm Alex Bookbinder. I'm a journalist, researcher, various sorts of hats that I've worn over the years in terms of my engagement with Myanmar. I think I want to add a bit of a comment maybe, and I guess maybe just to kind of gauge a little bit of clarification perhaps. And it's something that ties into what Oscar just asked in terms of the notion of protected homeland for the Rohingya in Rakhine State. I think, first of all, that's something that I think is extremely valuable. I think that is something that, even though it might be a little bit unrealistic, needless to say, given the prevailing political and structural realities. I think that that's something that should be worked towards. My hesitation, perhaps, there is I think that it's very important to define pretty precisely what that protected homeland entails and what it looks like. And I mean, I was discussing this with Dr. Zarni and Professor Charney before. I think if a protected homeland in the context that we're talking about entails the formation of a, I guess you could say, geographically bound zone or region for Rohingya within Rakhine State, I think that that's in and of itself not necessarily terribly constructive. And I think that Rakhine State as a whole needs to be the protected Rohingya homeland, as it is the Rakhine homeland. I mean, I think this notion that Rohingyas are, from northern Rakhine State in and of itself is a bit of a falsehood, and because it's also a relatively recent phenomenon that northern Rakhine State has been overwhelmingly Rohingya as such. I mean, we look at the demographic makeup of northern Rakhine now as, of course, it's always had like a large plurality as being Rohingya, but after World War II, you had large-scale population transfers from southern central Rakhine up into northern Rakhine and vice versa. So therefore, ethnic Rakhines and other minorities moved further south and Rohingyas moved north, which is a similar sort of phenomenon as to what we see or what we saw in Europe around the same time. And my, I guess, sort of expanding on that, what we see now is a Rohingya and Rakhine that realistically, if we look at the core issues here, as everyone has touched on, it is the central government that is a major problem here, and that there are perhaps more grievances shared between Rakhine and Rohingya communities than there are differences. And I hope that in some capacity there could be a way to reconcile that and to ensure that Rohingya and Rakhine leaders alike and people alike acknowledge that in order to build some sort of consensus to move forward. But I fear that kind of a notion of a protected homeland that I guess that might perhaps, if it's not done in a way that is inclusive, might prejudice the possibility for that sort of resolution from ever taking place. I know that was long-winded, but thank you.
So to, I guess, briefly summarize the three questions, comments, themes. So one is, what more can the international community do to move this forward and address this crisis? And then, is the Bangladeshi government doing enough from a foreign relations diplomacy perspective? We talked a lot about what's happening inside Bangladesh. And then finally, and I think also picked up in Oscar's question, there's been calls for a protected status for an area of Rakhine State, but how could that theoretically be achieved in terms of what area and also what of the ethnic Rakhine that are in that area, however defined, and have we lost hope for a unified Rakhine State at some point in the future where everyone can live with full civil rights and citizenship. So with that, maybe we'll start on this end, since I started on this end before. So, Sharon or Michael?
Yeah, we've talked a little about this before. I think it's true that there's if we went back a couple of years ago, we could point out how, and maybe it'll become the case again, where it would be very clear to the Rakhine that they and the Rohingya have so much in common relative to the central government. I don't foresee a safe situation where you could have them back together again unless the Damodar was removed from the picture. And I guess that's where the protective aspect comes in. In terms of a homeland, protected homeland, whether it's a portion of Rakhine or the whole thing. Maybe that's part of the solution, is to have the whole thing protected and have some kind of monitoring and protection between the different communities. Because once you remove the Damodar out of the picture, this is what the Damodar does in different ethnic areas. It's not just in Rakhine. They go and they sow differences between each other. They play different groups against each other, usually along ethnicity or language or religion. That we saw that happening in the Civil War. It's what they played to a high point in Arakan. Yeah. So yeah, maybe picking a very small portion is a. I mean, we could disagree a little bit about the history, because it's been the case that people have moved up and down. Yeah, and if we go back to the 18th century, then we find a situation where it was majority Muslim again. But you're right. This is probably a Rakhine general issue. This is for the whole region that needs to be dealt with. Now, how you remove the Damodar from that picture is the big question.
I will just go back to that. I think people who were forced out of their homes need to find a way to be able to come back to their homes in a way that they feel safe of going back and have their land and their farms and continue and establish their life again. But yes, protected. How? I wish we could sit in the UN Security Council and we can be speaking with everybody. I wish they would hear from you and everybody to kind of start thinking about what it means. Because ultimately also these issues become global issues. And I think this is where sort of, I don't understand necessarily also how sort of this, we think it's sort of a regional, nothing is regional, everything becomes global. And it's really finding this global solution and allowing people to go back to where they lived.
I'll focus on the question that came from here. I mean, I think it's easy to sort of, in hindsight, to say a lot of things, but if you're a leader of a country or a political party or government form the government of a country where it's not that much resourcey, and suddenly we have 1 million people who have entered in your country, I think it is a challenging task. How do we manage this? How do you negotiate this? Particularly intransigent, neighbor that we have. So in a way, diplomatically, I think Bangladesh government tried its best over the years to bend its back to sort of to ensure return. But there were some misplaced sort of hopes that a point that I made earlier. But it's also true that they felt that if we do not engage bilaterally, then Burma will get the opportunity to tell the world that we tried to address this issue. Bangladesh did not come on board. So in a way, that bilateralism was necessary, but I think it's about time that we say goodbye to that bilateralism. That's point number one. We have to really sort of, there is no reason for us to believe any further that Burma will, keep up its commitment, what it made. That's number one. Number two is we must be mindful of the fact that this is an election year for the government. So any party in power, for them, it is a difficult decision. So what Bangladesh tried to do is, when no headway was made, our understanding in it was assured by a very important power that go into this bilateral arrangement and we will take care of so that some form of return takes place. And I think in good faith, Bangladesh went into this arrangement, in which was not even an agreement, let alone an MOU, did that. But I think the power that be has failed to deliver Bangladesh in this regard. So that's the position. So on the humanitarian aspect, once the government was convinced that this is a case we should be, I think it out of its way. The Prime Minister personally went there, met the refugees, attended to them, made sure that they are taken care of, went to the international forum, appealed, made concrete suggestions. So on that front, on the humanitarian aspect, addressing this issue, providing leadership, I think we are all for it. But I think it is her bureaucrats and others that let her down to some extent. And so it's not one monolithic decision-making process. There are many actors, and there are external actors here. So to be fair to the government, it's walking a very tight rope. And that's why we we see these things, and we have to acknowledge that is the reality.
So I'd like to say something on that question of the protected area. As someone with as a Buddhist with ethnic Rakhine heritage myself, I don't have the answer to the question, but I would say that I do share concerns about the livelihood and the well-being of whatever Buddhists are within that protected area, because it is a mixed area. There will be some. And, I think back, I was very young when I left Burma, but in the 70s, this tells you a little bit about my age, in the 70s we lived in Malaysia. I was a small child. One of my father was an ethnic Rakhine, a Buddhist, and one of our best friends was, as we referred to at the time, a Rakhine Muslim, or Rohingya. And it was different political times, but even then, the government's targeting had begun. But, I was a small child, so there could have been discussions that I missed, but it wasn't, within, they had a friendship, and it wasn't, at least in, our relationship with this family, really anything that came up to any degree that I, as a kid, noticed. I don't know, does that mean that these tensions didn't exist at the time? No, it doesn't. But I do think that back then it was less at this high level of political pitch everywhere. And I guess speaking for myself, I understand the reason for the call for the protected area, but I personally have not lost hope for the idea that we can mend things within Rakhine State. My concern is how long would that take, and what, for the people now who are living in Cox's Bazar, for Rohingya who are living abroad but who still want to go back. So that's what's challenging. I have not lost hope, but I also think that the people that have been displaced now should not be like a throwaway generation while we try to work this out. So that, I think, is the biggest challenge from my opinion. So with that.
Well, yes, I don't think any of us should be criticizing Bangladesh for not doing enough when Bangladesh is really doing just about everything. But sure, yes, they could do more. I'd like to talk about the protected area. I don't know how many of you remember Darfur, but I have a friend from that region in the world who went to Darfur, and he was horrified to see that at 5 o'clock, the men who were protecting the women who were in camps would go home. And of course, the bad guys would come after the guys went home for home. We have to go? Okay. Well, the other thing is that, one other comment from General Dallaire told about the genocide in Rwanda. He had 26 nations represented in his group at one point, and they were going down a road during or just after the genocide, and they found some people in a ditch, and there was of course, there's dangers about AIDS, all kinds of things, and Dallaire asked the people with him, how many of you would go down and help those people out of the ditch, those victims out of the ditch? And out of the 26 countries represented, do you know how many said their soldiers said they would? 2. So 24 soldiers from 24 different countries or more would not have got out of their vehicles and gone down to help people who were. So you've got to be extremely careful who you get in your protection group.
Thank you. I think we have to move on to the pre-scheduled Skype discussion. Thank you all for this lively discussion. It was a pleasure to participate. I'm sorry, Demir, that you did not get a chance to answer the last